All right, so let's start off with tip number one, which is a framework, and that is to think like a TV producer. We got to make sure that we have the proper mindset before we get into the actual steps and strategies. And before you come from my head in the comments saying, Caleb, I'm a meeting planner, I'm not a TV producer, and I definitely don't have their budget, it's okay. We're not trying to reproduce a crazy production unless you are a meeting planner that is on those types of productions. We're not focused on that. We're focused on taking the mindset of a TV producer so that way we can be resourceful with what we have. Now, I want you to think back to the last time that you watched the Oscars, the Grammys, or even just a Sunday night football game. The Super Bowl even, right? But let's say something that's not as big as the Super Bowl, just a Sunday night football game. Now, all of these things right here are TV productions, and they all have a lot of common factors. And that common factor is that they prioritize the online experience. Now, in this case, online means TV, right? Because what they're doing is focusing on the people who are going to be viewing these shows on TV, people who are going to be watching all of these broadcasts on TV. How we translate that to events is very similar because you're going to be broadcasting something to an online audience, whether that's through Zoom, whether that's through your YouTube, your organization's Facebook, whatever the case is. So we want to take the tips that they use, which number one is prioritizing the online experience. Now, I want you to think back to the time that you've watched one of these productions. And I want you to think about the common things and the common themes that they all have. The common themes that they all have is that they prioritize the online experience, and they prioritize them in a few different ways, right? So they prioritize the wants, the needs, and the challenges of their audience. Now, how do they prioritize the wants, needs, and challenges? Let's take the Oscars, for example. When you watch the Oscars, they have a portion where there are red carpet interviews before the actual show starts. Now, this allows you to get insights on the awardees, the nominees, and what they're feeling in the moment, right? Are they nervous? Are they anxious? Are they excited, right? You get an inside look into how they're feeling because you want to feel like you're on that red carpet with them. You want to feel like you could talk to them and you could understand how they're feeling in that moment, right? And that transfers onto your experience. Let's touch on needs. The Grammys, they need to keep the energy high throughout their entire show because it's a long show. So they pre-schedule and they pre-rehearse different performances throughout that award show to keep the energy high. Now, how does the NFL prioritize the challenges of their online audience? What they do is they introduce team lineups during the first possession for each team. You may be watching and you have no clue who's on the field, but when they have those team lineups of their starting lineup introducing themselves, right? When that team gets that first possession, now you at least know, okay, these are the people that are on the field. All right, so with those examples, you can see how they prioritize the online experience and the breakdown of what they're doing when they prioritize this experience, right? They're taking into account the wants, needs, and challenges of their online audience, which forces them to prioritize it, which means that they're not treating their audience as an afterthought, right? They're not treating the in-person audience more than they're treating the online audience, right? They're not treating them as a higher priority than they are the online audience. They're treating them the same, just across different mediums and different platforms. which means that they're significantly adding value to the online experience for their online audience, in this case, us watching the TV. Now, when you're planning your virtual or hybrid event, I want you to start thinking of content and things that would resonate and engage your audience, right? I want you to use your insights from previous events, and I want you to get creative with crafting content that will add value. So let's think this also works in reverse, right? We did the breakdown of what it means to prioritize the online experience, and this is literally how you prioritize the experience. So you add value. How do you add value? You start adding value by not treating your online experience as an afterthought. How do you not treat your online experience as an afterthought? You think about the wants, needs, and challenges that they will have compared to your in-person audience, or if it's fully virtual, you just think about the wants, needs, and challenges that they will have, which all leads you to prioritize the online experience. So now that you have this framework and you're thinking of all of the different opportunities that you can uncover, I want you to think of the potential challenges that can come up. What parts of your event seem hard to translate online? How are you going to allow virtual attendees to access an exhibit booth? How are you going to replicate networking sessions? Can you reimagine a swag bag for your online attendees? Start thinking about these things, because it's not always just going to be opportunities. There are going to be those challenges too, but that goes back to what we said about understanding the wants, needs, and challenges. This is how you prioritize them, and this is how you add that value. And to go back to it, I know some of you guys are probably already thinking, Caleb, I'm not a TV producer. I'm not here. I don't have their budget, right? Look, we're not trying to produce the Oscars. We're not trying to produce the Grammys. We're not trying to produce a Sunday night football game. Unless you are a meeting planner for one of these organizations, then holla at me, because we can go ahead and do that. But we're not trying to produce this, right? We're trying to take their framework and be resourceful with our current environment, our current budget, where we're currently at, and see how much we can pull out of it, how much value we can create from what we have through being resourceful and simply changing our mindset. Let's get into tip number 2, which is to craft an immersive experience for your audience. Now, you're gonna hear that word a lot throughout this video: experience, 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 because that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day. People don't remember too much of the event other than how their experience felt to them and what value they were able to take away from it. There are a few things to crafting an immersive experience for your audience, and some of these tips are going to apply specifically to hybrid events, but a good amount of these are going to be able to be translated throughout both. But this first one, let's get into it, which is visual experience is key. Visual experience is key. And I'm gonna put this in orange so that way you understand why I'm saying this. Visual experience is key. Now, why is visual experience key? Visual experience is key for a few reasons. It is one of the ways that you can keep your audience engaged. 2, it represents your organization's brand, which could mean polished, professional, and authoritative within your industry or within your field. Now, I'll be honest with you, nobody wants to join an online event that feels like their 7th Zoom meeting of the day. People are on these online conferencing platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, whatever you want to call it. People are on these every single day. They're on these all the time. And nobody wants to join an actual event that feels like they're just joining another team meeting, that feels like they're joining a meeting that they're tuning themselves out of anyway, right? So you want to create a visual experience that allows them to feel like they want to be engaged and also represents your organization's brand in a polished, professional, and authoritative way. Now, how do you accomplish this? You accomplish this by working, right, All right, now all of this, right? So if this is key, how do we accomplish all of this? We accomplish this by working with an audiovisual or broadcast vendor that understands your goals and can customize the look of your event. So how do we accomplish this? If we know visual experience is key, how do we keep our audience engaged and represent the organization's brand in a polished, professional, and authoritative way? We do this by working with an audiovisual or broadcast vendor that understands your goals. When you're working with one of these vendors, you want to make sure that you're able to clearly communicate what it is that you want your audience to feel at the end of your event. You want your audience to take away. What is the purpose of your event? When you work with an audiovisual or broadcast vendor that understands the goals for your event, it's going to allow them to help customize the look of your event, which, like I said, everything works in reverse as well. We break down the why, and then the how is literally the reverse of the why. So when you work with an audiovisual broadcast vendor that understands your goals, they can help customize the look of your event. When they help customize the look of your event, it's going to represent your organization's brand as polished, professional, and authoritative, which is going to make your audience want to be more engaged because they're going to come into this event and they're going to say, wow, even though I clicked on a Zoom link, I feel like I'm watching the Oscars. I feel like I'm watching the Grammys. I feel like I'm watching a Sunday night football game, as opposed to the 13th meeting that they've had this week on Zoom, which is why a visual experience is key. Now, this is just one component of crafting an immersive experience for your audience, but this can be translated across both virtual and hybrid events. Now, I want you guys to see the theme here between the previous tip, this tip, and everything else that I'm going to be showing on this whiteboard. I'm giving you the why of the tip, and then literally when we break down the why, the how is the reverse. The how is the reverse of the why. And so when you understand it like that and you can break down that framework, you come first with the why, you break down the why, and then the how works in reverse of the actual execution. So So we talked about the visual experience being key, and that spans across both fully virtual and hybrid events. But I want to give you guys a little bit of a tip that is specific for hybrid events. Okay, now let's talk about enhancing hybrid event engagement. And this is something that's specific to hybrid events, but it's still about crafting the immersive experience. Now, this is something where you are going to need more budget for this, but this is going to really take up the experience for your online audience and even your in-person audience up a notch. And how do we do this? You do that by treating the audience as one. Treating the audience as one. Now, in the previous tip, I definitely said that you want to prioritize your online audience, which means that you would almost treat them separately, almost as a separate priority in relation to your in-person attendees. But when you're treating the audience as one, you need to make it as if the online audience and the in-person audience are experiencing the same thing. They may be in two different locations. They may be two different audiences with two different sets of needs, wants, and challenges, but they're all experiencing one thing. Now, a cool way, a really, really cool way to do this is by having hosts, right? So have hosts. You want to have a host or an MC for both audiences, right? For both. Now, when you have a host or an MC for both audiences, what it does is it merges the two. And now they become one audience. They become one audience and they're experiencing the same event, but through two different mediums. And what I mean by having a host or an MC, if you have an online host, let's go back to black. You want to have an online host and an in-person host. What this does is it creates almost like a game. And it creates a game because the online audience just becomes an extension. Typically, the in-person audience doesn't really know about the online audience unless they may come in and ask some questions for Q&A. Maybe you're pulling in some people from online. But other than that, the people who are in-person attending are pretty much, it's out of their mind. They're not even thinking about the online audience. They're focused on what's in front of them because they're there in person. What this does is it creates an extension of the in-person audience to the online, and it connects them. And how it connects them is that you have both of these hosts working together to bring that continuity between both audiences. So I want you to just think about this for a second, right? Because this is a framework, right? This is a framework, right? We're going back to frameworks. I want you guys to think about this the same way thinking like a TV producer was a framework, and then we got into some of the actual practical steps and strategies. Same thing with this. This is specific to hybrid events. So I want you to think of this as a framework first, and then in the next tip, we will get into some of the practical steps. But remember, the framework is treating the audience as one. You want to treat the online audience as an extension of your in-person audience, not as two separate audiences. Now, granted, they do have different needs, wants, and challenges, but you want to treat the audience as one, and you want to treat them as experiencing one event. You want to treat the online audience as an extension of your in-person audience. So that way, both the in-person audience and the online audience are able to connect and engage seamlessly. Tip number 3, which in my opinion is essential. I feel like if you have tip number 1 and tip number 2, but you don't implement tip number 3, it's kind of all for nothing, which is maximizing your on-demand content and next year's marketing. Now, remember, we're talking about thinking like a TV producer. I even gave you guys some tips that were specific to hybrid events where you will need more budget to incorporate. And it doesn't make sense to invest more into these kinds of things if you're not doing tip number 3, maximizing your on-demand content and next year's marketing. Now, remember in the intro when I talked about the opportunity cost of missing the mark for your online event? This is where it really starts to show, and this is why you want to make sure that you are planning a lot of what you're doing for your event with repurposing in mind. So let's talk about the practical steps for this, right? So this all comes down to strategic planning from the beginning. We want to make sure we are strategically planning from the beginning. This, right, is done in a few different ways. We have something called on-demand content, next year's marketing, repurposing. I'm saying all of these different buzzwords. What does it actually mean? We want to make sure that we are creating digital assets. It doesn't make sense for us to focus on engaging our audience, for us to put additional budget into doing all these different things if we're not creating digital assets. Now, what are some examples of digital assets, right? Examples of digital assets. We have playback recordings. This can be your keynotes, any of your other sessions. This can be attendee testimonials, right? This can be attendee insights, right? Maybe Q&A, something like that. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing for this event, for this online event, is going to be able to be repurposed. Now, with these playback recordings, right, the thing is that you have so many assets that you can play around with. These can either be monetized, right? So how do these digital assets, how are they actually assets, right? So we have our playback recordings, but how are these actual assets, right? And not just recordings, right? So these can either be monetized, these can be repurposed for social media, and we can monetize these as on-demand content, right? You can add a feature to your online event where people pay a little bit more money to get some of these recordings for some of the sessions that they register to. You can monetize it. You can repurpose it for social media, which will enhance your organization's reputation, enhance your organization's message. So we can monetize these digital assets. We can repurpose them for social media, and we can use them to market for next year. So this is how these turn from just being recordings to actual assets. Because like I said, you can monetize them year round. You can repurpose them on your social media year round. And you can also market them for next year. Now, a lot of times what I see organizations just doing event recaps or just doing certain things that are good, but they're not comprehensive. And to really get the full value out of your event, you want something that's comprehensive, and you want something that is going to be able to create momentum and compound over a period of time. Now, if you're creating these digital assets through your playback recordings, and you're thinking from the start of monetizing them, repurposing them for social media, marketing them for next year, then you're already going to have a streamlined process once your event ends for you to already begin building anticipation for next year's event. Now, this is where it actually gets a whole lot better, because if you work with, let's go back to tip 1, work with an AV vendor, right? If you work with the right AV vendor, then when they're helping customize the look of your event through that visual experience, what they're gonna do is already create custom layouts, use your branding elements, your QR codes, whatever it is. It's already going to be essentially baked in to the post-editing process. So post-event, most of the turnaround for getting these digital assets should already be done because they pre-planned it in mind. So the same way that you're being strategic and planning from the beginning, you want to make sure you're working with a vendor that is sharing that same mindset in planning from the beginning. So you want to work with a vendor that shares the same mindset, because what's the point of working with an audiovisual vendor that's going to customize the look of your event, make things look nice, just for you to have to go and actually turn these recordings into actual assets afterwards and find a different vendor, find an editor, find all these different things, when you could have them pre-bake it before the event even starts into how they're crafting that visual experience for your audience. So this is tip number 3, and I touched on a lot of what I'm already going to go into moving forward on a high level. We're gonna do a little bit of a deep dive onto certain specific things, but this is essentially the framework for maximizing your on-demand content. Now let's go into some more specific and granular details on what it actually means to do this and how we can actually do it. These are the high-level strategies, so let's get into specific pinpoints. Now this falls under the category of tip number 3, maximizing your on-demand content in next year's marketing, but this is more so for the actual event itself and not necessarily post-event. A lot of this is post-event. I'm going to give you a subset of this tip, which is for the actual event itself, right? So I'll just put post-event up here. I'll just put post-event right there, but we're going to go down into the actual event day because I think that this is really important, actual event day, because I think that this is really important and this is something that I see constantly that meeting planners are not taking advantage of, and it could be a true game changer. So that is understanding the value of breaks. Now, one of the most common mistakes that I see with event planners is that they don't understand the value of breaks. And I see this time and time again, right? I see event planners treating their online audience the same as the in-person audience when it comes to breaks. Naturally, in an in-person event, you're gonna have breaks, you're gonna have networking breaks, coffee chats and lunch breaks and, breaks in between presenters and breaks in between sessions. But you guys gotta recognize, and some of you do, but I see this so often and it's such a missed opportunity. You gotta understand, for your online audience, breaks are a golden opportunity. They're a golden opportunity. Why wouldn't you want to give your online audience a break, right? Why wouldn't you want to give your online audience a break, right? Because their environment gives them plenty of opportunity to take a break. I'll just say gives them space to make it easier on the whiteboard. So their environment already gives them plenty opportunity to take a break. So why would you let them off the hook by also saying, we're gonna take a short break? Now you can say, we're gonna take a short break. There's nothing wrong with that, but you want to utilize this golden opportunity, right, to enhance your organization's voice, right? To re-engage your audience. And what would this look like, right? So so this is the why, right? Now let's go into the how. What we want to do is we want to use pre-planned content during those breaks. Now, what are some examples of pre-planned content? That can look like, and forgive my use of colors, I'm just kind of being random with it, but that can look like interviews with your keynote speaker. If you have a keynote speaker, why not get an interview with them to get their insights, to treat them like they're on the Oscars red carpet, right? Get an interview with them, have this pre-planned so that when you are going to break, and you know that your break is 15 minutes, you can have a 5-minute interview, 10-minute interview with your keynote speaker before they go ahead and get on stage and give that keynote. What else can this look like? So we have our interviews with keynote speakers. You can showcase upcoming events. Now this ties back to what we have up here. Now remember, the tip was initially post-event, but this is all about the event day. You can showcase upcoming events. You can have promotional videos for upcoming events that can be played during your breaks. So we have interviews with keynote speaker, showcase upcoming events, and then this last tip, which I am going to put back in black, just so that way it's easier to read. But this is specifically tied to the host or MC tip that I gave earlier, right? Leverage your host/MC. Now, how do you leverage your host or MC? You can do it in a few different ways, right? You can take them behind the scenes so they can just get a glimpse of what's going on. You can have them interact with the speakers. And the purpose of this MC is for them to be the spokesperson of the online audience. So you can take them behind the scenes. You take them behind the scenes, what can that look like? Just showing them what's going on behind the scenes. You can take them to the different exhibit booths. You can take them to any part of the actual in-person audience, showing them the different rooms, the different venues, right? You can have them interact with speakers, right? You can also have them interact with attendees. This goes back to the extension that I was talking about, right? You can have them interact with attendees, get insights on the attendee experience. This is very similar to what I was speaking about with the Oscars, where you're giving that red carpet feel, that red carpet experience. It makes them feel like, wow, I'm actually at this event. It drums up inspiration and it drums up excitement that makes them want to attend in person next year. Okay, so now that we've talked about maximizing your breaks and understanding its value on the day of the event, right? We know that our breaks are a golden opportunity. We know why they're actually a golden opportunity. And the number one mistake, which I didn't write down, but I want you to put it down in the comments if you know, the number one mistake that meeting planners make when it comes to breaks, if you didn't put it down yet, the number one mistake is actually giving them a break. Never use a returning shortly slide, a break slide. Never do that for your online audience. Never do it. I talked about this being a golden opportunity, right? But if it's a golden opportunity and now you know what you can do to take advantage of this golden opportunity, how is it a golden opportunity? What does it actually do for it to have so much value that it's a mistake if you don't do this? Well, here are a few things of what it actually does. So the first thing that it does is it retains your audience, right? It also reinforces key messaging. That example is tied to showing upcoming events, maybe even just something about your organization, maybe even just a video that your organization wants your attendees to know about. So it retains your audience, it reinforces key messaging, and it goes back to what we talked about for post-event, which it creates valuable digital assets. Because now you have these things, right? Behind the scenes, interacting with speakers, interacting with attendees that are real and genuine in the moment. And because you're working with that audiovisual vendor who is going to make sure that all of these components are being captured in an engaging and visually pleasing way, you can leverage this when you're marketing next year's events, and you can use this when you're showcasing upcoming events for next year. So you see it kind of acts as a cycle and it compounds over time, which is why this tip is so important, because if you're not maximizing it, the opportunity cost is significant. And you can literally compound how you're growing over time by utilizing this framework. Now, I touched on this a little bit already over here, but I'm just going to reiterate it because I want you guys to understand the true importance of utilizing tip number 3 and why I think it's the most important tip. And without it, nothing else really matters in the long run because you didn't get the most out of it, which is ROI, right? So why this matters for ROI. When you maximize your breaks and you repurpose your content, it surpasses, right? Your event lives on past the day that it ends, right? Your event lives on past the day that it ends. So remember, ROI is return on investment. And if your event lives on past the day that it ends, it's not just about the day or the week, however long your event is. It's not just about the day of your event, but it comes back to, like I said, creating digital assets. But more importantly, this framework, when you have an ROI focus, is about creating, I'm gonna use a different color. It's about creating a library of digital assets that can be used and repurposed long after the event ends. Long after the event ends. And not only can they be repurposed, but it drives value, right? So it creates a library of digital assets that ultimately drive value. I'm gonna put this in a different color too. Drive value long after the event ends. Now, when you're able to drive value long after the event ends to your audience, to the people who are coming across your organization, it puts your organization in a different positioning. And if you're creating all of these digital assets, you're creating this library off of one single event, you can constantly compound its effect over time. And you're able to consistently drive value once the event ends. You're able to consistently reuse this, repurpose it, repack it, and you just have so many avenues and so many ways that you can use it to achieve your organization's goals. Now, when you think about this in terms of ROI, everything that I talked about in tip 3 is really, let's go ahead. Remember, so now we know the why, right? Everything in here is truly the only way, right? Truly the only way to get a positive ROI and ensure the long-term impact of your online events. So make sure that you replay tip 3 quite a few times. I mean, replay everything, because I know this is a pretty long video and we're going pretty in depth, but you want to really make sure that you're focused on the framework and the strategies in tip number 3, because if you implement everything else and you don't implement what we talked about in tip number 3, you're not going to get that truly positive ROI for your online event. And the long-term impact of it is going to suffer, which is really important. Now we have the framework, we have the mindset, we're thinking like a TV producer, we're being resourceful, we're identifying opportunities, we're identifying challenges, we're getting everything that we need on the framework, the mindset, the practical steps, the strategies. We're thinking about this for the long term. We're going to create digital assets for our organization, and we're going to see a truly positive ROI. All of that's great. But if you don't rehearse, and rehearse some more, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to matter. You want to make sure that you are taking the ample time to get everybody on the same page, right? We all know that with the Oscars, the Grammys, NFL, Sunday Night Football, they are not rehearsing these productions a couple of weeks out. They're not rehearsing these productions the week before it's supposed to go through, right? They're taking ample time and the time that they need to be able to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Everyone knows where they're supposed to be, what's supposed to be happening, because we all know the nature of live events is that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and that things are fluid, things are dynamic, things are constantly changing. When I say rehearse, and rehearse some more, we need to make sure that we are rehearsing not just once, but often, and with everyone involved. With everyone involved. This is why you want to loop in your audiovisual vendor, broadcast vendor, whoever is going to be a part of this production, a part of this show. You want to loop them in as early as you can, right? When it comes to the technical aspect of things, you want to lean on the expertise of your audiovisual vendor, of your broadcast vendor, whoever you're using. You want to lean on their expertise in that area, but logistically, you want to make sure that you're looping everyone in as early as you possibly can. And you also want to make sure that you're keeping people aware of changes, right? Because like I spoke about earlier, we all know that live events, both in person, hybrid, virtual, whatever, any live event is always dynamic, fluid, and subject to change. Keep everyone aware of the changes that happen throughout. So that way, people know how to pivot, people know how to adapt, and we can be aware of what is going to happen or what may or may not happen. So that way, we can be prepared for it. Rehearsing, keep everyone aware of changes, it's not too many practical tips that I'm going to get into with this. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to give you some advice. Rehearse often with everyone involved. Keep people aware of changes, right? Lean on the expertise of your vendors. Lean on the expertise of your AV or broadcast vendor, because you want them to be the experts in the technical aspect of that. So lean on their expertise. And you also want to make sure that you're accounting for this in your budget, because obviously all of this rehearsing is going to affect your budget. It's going to add cost to your budget. So you want to make sure that you are accounting for that and understanding the limits of your budget and what you can do within that and how that affects rehearsals. Now, a common mistake that I see meeting planners make, event planners make, is that they think that online events don't need as much rehearsal, or, it goes back to that afterthought thing that I talked about in the first tip. But you got to recognize that online, hybrid, virtual events take just as much rehearsal, if not more, a lot of times more rehearsal than your in-person event. And if you don't have that, things are going to be going wrong. You're going to mess up on key moments that really hit on those points in tip 3 that I talked about. So you want to just make sure that you're not sabotaging the experience for your online attendees due to the fact that you didn't do enough rehearsal. All right, now that you have all of the tips, tools, and strategies to be able to put on an outstanding online event, turn this into a major tool for growth with what you're doing in your organization, there's still one thing that you got to be aware of. And this comes down to choosing the right vendor. And I'm not going to get super heavy into this, right? This is a bonus tip. This is a bonus tip, all right? Choose the right vendor. And I'm not going to get too much into this in this video because we already covered a lot. It is a pretty long video. But if you want to figure out what it looks like, if I can spell right, what it looks like to choose the right vendor, click on this video that's here, somewhere on this screen, and I will walk you through the 5 questions that you need to ask before you sign the contract with your audiovisual vendor, so that way you're choosing the right vendor, regardless of if it's for an in-person, hybrid, virtual, whatever event that you're doing, whatever meeting that you're doing, that you're choosing the right vendor, so that way you don't look bad because you're having to take the blame of a faulty vendor. So with that, drop below in the comments anything that you are challenged with, anything that you have struggles with. I want to help you guys out as much as I can. So let's get a conversation going. I want to hear what you guys are doing with online events. What are your organizations doing? What are your guys' opinions on online events? Is your organization even prioritizing them? Is your organization going back to just doing in person? Let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you on the next one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.